Hi, my name is Jessica Salas, and today I am sharing my research into how do multimodal texts support reading comprehension in secondary classrooms. So, as a future ELL teacher and a future world languages teacher, I'm interested in creating learning experiences that reflect how the students actually engage with information today. So, rather than relying on just traditional textbooks, students now interact with videos, podcasts, social media, graphic novels, websites, and other digital media every single day. So, my research explored how these different forms of text can strengthen comprehension while helping students become more engaged and more successful readers. So, why does this matter? I chose this topic because the way students read has changed dramatically over the past decade. Reading is no longer limited to just printed books or articles. Students naturally move between books and videos, podcasts, social media, and digital platforms as they learn and as they communicate. So, according to Shunins and Diswani, adolescents don't separate these experiences. As we just stated, they move fluidly among these different forms of text as they construct their meaning. So that idea really resonated with me because as a future Spanish teacher, I want my classroom to reflect those authentic literacy experiences instead of just relying exclusively on a textbook or traditional text. So we did state reading has changed, just like everything else has. But we know that reading itself has evolved. So Shunins and Diswani explained that adolescents don't separate the reading into neat categories. So instead, as they're fluidly moving rather among these books and digital games and fan fiction that they love, websites and social media, they are constructing meaning. So this does challenge the traditional idea that reading only happens through printed text. So today, literacy involves interpreting information across multiple formats. So, if classrooms continue to focus only on traditional print, they do risk creating a disconnect between school literacy and the authentic literacy practices that students do every single day. The first area that I looked at were graphic novels, since they are so incredibly popular right now, and I think honestly they will continue to be. So, one common misconception is that graphic novels are easier than traditional books. However, DeHart argues that graphic novels actually demand sophisticated reading skills because students must simultaneously interpret written language, images, facial expressions, symbolism, page layout, and so much more, all while reading. Also, Knudsen explains that readers actively construct meaning by connecting their visual and their linguistic information. So that requires constant inference and critical thinking. So, together, they were both stating that graphic novels are not simplified reading materials, as people might assume. However, they are cognitively demanding multimodal texts that support comprehension while also providing additional access points for multilingual learners and striving readers. So, they really make the text more accessible to a broader swath of students. Then I took a look at visual literacy, infographics, maps, all the other ways that we digest information that aren't strictly text. So, another important finding is that students must learn to read visuals just as they would reading text, the written word. So, Nunu explains that infographics require students to evaluate evidence, analyze data, identify patterns, determine an author's purpose, and recognize how design influences meaning. As a former graphic designer, I can tell you that every single decision that goes into making a graphic is done so with the intent of how will this be read, how will this be interpreted, the colors that are used, the placement on the page, how the eye flows throughout the context. So this is definitely something that we need to help our students learn to evaluate. And these skills extend far beyond English class or any class for that matter. Scientists interpret graphs, historians analyze political cartoons, economists might examine the data visualizations, and engineers rely on diagrams. Pretty much everyone has to have this skill. So, as Nunu suggests, teaching students how to critically analyze these visuals prepares them for authentic literacy practices across every discipline and across their life in general. So another subset that I looked at were audiobooks, which often get downplayed as well. So a major finding focuses on these audio-based texts. Research reported by Mineo and who is from Harvard University, along with a neuroscience research summarized by Walter, states that listening to an audiobook activates many of the same language comprehension systems that are used when reading printed text. So while the decoding looks different, comprehension relies on the same vocabulary, the same background knowledge, inferencing, and meaning making processes. So this has important implications for equity, especially because audiobooks help multilingual learners interpret this information. They help students with dyslexia who may struggle reading the words on a page, and they help students with visual impairments who can't read the words on the page, or students with any other reading challenges access that grade level content without reducing the academic rigor, which is ever so important. We don't want to lower those standards. We want to create scaffolding and supports that will help our students reach those standards. So taking a look at what the research says in general, was there a through line? What were there common themes? And absolutely there were. So each study focused on a different type of multimodal text, but there were many themes that did emerge. So there were 4 key ideas that consistently appeared. First, multimodal texts increased student engagement because they connected with the ways that students already consume this information. So making this information relevant to students through multimodal text is really going to be a way for them to engage with it. Secondly, they strengthen the comprehension by allowing students to construct meaning through multiple representations. As we know, as educators, you must repeat this information. People don't get it. Students don't get it just the first time. Any person doesn't. So if we're able to repeat this information and construct this meaning multiple different ways, it's only enhancing their comprehension of it. Third, they develop disciplinary literacy by teaching students how experts communicate within the different fields, as we discussed with historians or scientists, how everyone has their own way of garnering all of this information and interpreting it. It's not just going to be through traditional text. And finally, they promote equitable access by providing multiple pathways for students to engage with the complexity of the content. So together, these findings suggest that multimodal texts are much more than just engaging classroom activities. They are very powerful instructional tools that will support the learning for all students. But what does this even look like in a classroom? So if we take a look at 4 different classrooms, we can see how rather than just relying solely on traditional textbooks, teachers can intentionally integrate these multimodal texts into their daily instruction. So drawing on the work of Nunu, Doerr, Schoons, and Diswani that we've mentioned so far, instruction should mirror the authentic ways that students encounter information in today's world. So, for example, history students might analyze a political cartoon. They might take a look at a map. They might dissect a speech or take a look at some historical photographs or even watch documentary clips all alongside of written documents and the traditional text book that they might have in their classroom. So all of those multimodal texts will support each other and increase comprehension and understanding. Science students will interpret diagrams. They are going to see simulations. They might interpret data tables in addition to the informational text that they have. World language teachers might utilize authentic videos or advertisements. They might have students listen to recent podcasts or dive into graphic novels that are written in the target language. There are just so many options out there. And last but not least, English language arts teachers might use graphic novels, audiobooks, comic strips alongside of their traditional novels and poems, only to enhance the comprehension of their students. So these instructional choices don't replace the reading. They actually expand the way that the students engage with the content while strengthening comprehension in their critical thinking. So what am I going to do about it? As I can take a look at my future Spanish classroom, this research really has influenced the way that I envision that. So inspired by this work, I want my students to engage in authentic Spanish language materials rather than just a traditional textbook. So I might have my students explore the advertisements, listen to a modern day podcast, look at the graphic novels that are written in the target language, take a look at some videos or movies, even infographics and other real world texts like newspaper articles that would really help make this known that Spanish is a living language. It's not just relegated to a textbook in a classroom. So these resources not only build language proficiency, but they also deepen the students' cultural understanding while helping them develop visual, media, and critical literacy skills. So again, we want to emphasize that Spanish is a living language and it exists far beyond the classroom. So, in conclusion, my research demonstrates that multimodal texts are no longer simply just an instructional enhancement, but they are becoming an educational necessity. If we want to get these kids engaged and we want to reach them at their level, it only makes sense to use everything that is at our advantage here. So, as Shunins and Diswani, DeHart, Nunu, Mineo, and Walter all demonstrate, reading comprehension develops most effectively when students engage with the multiple representations of meaning. So, all of the tools in our toolbox. Today's students must learn to interpret this information presented through words and images, through audio, through graphics, through digital media, because that is how communication increasingly occurs in everyday life. So, as educators, our responsibility is not just to teach students to read the printed text, it's to prepare them to critically think and to construct meaning across multiple forms of communication. So, ultimately, when we do embrace this multimodal literacy, we can create classrooms that are more engaging, more equitable, and better aligned with the world that our students are currently living in. So I just want to take a minute to thank you so much for listening. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my research with you on how multimodal learning is a necessity in today's secondary classrooms.